And we are back. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Media Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of, well, hundreds of thousands of stories. We've told a couple tonight. We're going to go national, though, with someone who is scheduled to join us at the 8 o'clock hour. Through the miracle of independent media, our 7 o'clock guest, well, she's in Israel right now. And I guess I should have anticipated this, but communications over the interwebs, as they say, can be exciting at times. So had a little trouble reaching her. So Connor Drigotas has joined us early on. At the 8 o'clock hour, we're going to talk about, I think, a very provocative article he has published on his website about gun control. But we've got a few other things that with the luxury of a little time that I'd wanted to get into during his last appearance. He is now officially a repeat offender here at the Coalition. So let's first start by saying he is an activist within the Pennsylvania Libertarian Network. He is a graduate of Lafayette College, or is it Lafayette University now?
Lafayette College and Lehigh University. I feel like a little bit of a turncoat talking about it, but
how does that work?
Yeah.
Do they have like a protective custody for you during the game?
Well, I was lucky enough that I did my undergraduate at Lafayette, and I actually had family members who attended Lehigh. So when I decided to go back and get my MBA and I chose Lehigh, it was very good to be able to say, go to them and say, well, hey, at least I made the right decision the second time.
Right.
But yes, it's encouraging to, I'm gonna, have to get a reversible sweatshirt because I'm actually going back to teach at Lehigh starting this fall now. So I'm really going all in on Lehigh as it is.
No, that's exciting, and I read that you touched on a little bit of that. Congratulations, that's just outstanding. And what are you going to be teaching there?
Business communications. I work in as a business, a director of communications professionally for a law firm. So it's just really great to be able to take that real world experience and bring it into the classroom and hopefully have some great results with freshmen and also some juniors to get them prepped for the real world.
Right, and the great thing about Lehigh and I'll admit it, Lafayette, is that they are the type of schools where they're, in one sense, they're upper crusty kind of schools, but at the same time, when you graduate from each of them, you are fully cognizant and ready to embrace said real world. That's not something we can say for every $75,000 university at this point. Something that parents might appreciate when making their personal choices for college is that, yes, you are not only ready for employment in the real world, but you will probably be employed in the real world very, very quickly. So let's talk about, if you will, we've got a few minutes here now just so we can kind of spitball. Business communications, by definition, incorporates social media. I am of the MySpace, the Facebook generation here. I go back to a time when it was called the Facebook, and when a lot of us were trying to scam academic emails so that we could get on the Facebook, back when you had to be associated with a college for the Facebook. Now my kids tell me that the Facebook is going the way of Tom at MySpace, and that's a dated reference for any of you born in this millennium. But so what is happening in media? It's during Facebook, the beginning, I should say, of Facebook's continuing travails last year or so, after the election, when it became clear that Facebook was the platform du jour of every Russian mobster and every Trump wannabe and every Hillary whatever, that every political organization was ball gaming the system like nobody's business. When it became clear that Facebook was performing all sorts of atrocities with regard to privacy, when all this became clear, there was this wild scrum, if you will, to find out what the next great platform is. So what is it? Has IG, because I can sound like my kids for a second, has IG taken over the world? What happened to Snapchat? What is, what are some of the sites that are cutting edge? And then what are some of the sites that need to be forgotten as quickly as possible?
Yeah. Well, to exactly your point, Facebook is kind of catching it from two sides, right? I mean, yes, of course, you've seen in the news last week they were fined what $5 billion for going
$5 billion.
back to I believe some Cambridge Analytica stuff a number of years ago. That's finally getting resolved in the courts. But on the other side, they have what I think is a much more interesting problem outside of the judicial system, which is the problems that they have with users. Facebook, for lack of a better phrase, they're getting old. And that's not just the company is getting older, but their user base tends to be, aging because the same people are continuing to use it. And to answer your question directly, most younger people are using other social networks, primarily Instagram. You're absolutely right. But there's a growing movement, like in a lot of different industries, for decentralization. So you're seeing the growth of platforms like Discord, Slack to a certain extent for more business applications, but also things like Parler, which is conservative-minded type of Twitter platform, and similarly Gab, Gab, which is a platform that I was recently introduced to. I'm a big fan of it, but again, it kind of breaks down these barriers by saying, as well, I guess it's recognizing a gap in the Facebook market as it exists currently, which is, hey, we're not going to actually regulate your speech. We're not going to control it. They are very upfront and forward that, hey, we're going to operate within the bounds of United States law, for example. But other than that, they really treat it like a playground. And a lot of younger people are relating to that. And I think especially conservative younger people who have for a long time felt a little bit put out and a little bit put down by some of these platforms that, as is their right to do as a private business, have not been particularly friendly.
Right, and I just give you a personal example. About a month or so, I had the privilege, if you will, of interviewing people from a town called Denton, New Mexico. What's so special about them? Well, imagine this. You're a town about 30 or so miles from the Mexican border. You wake up one morning, or a couple of townspeople get a call one morning that there are about 40 or so refugees have been dropped off by the Border Patrol at a local bus station that happens to be in Denton, New Mexico. And then when they began to learn that the process of post-refugee status was you essentially get dropped off. How did Denton, New Mexico react? Well, I'm sorry, Deming, wow. Well, in a spectacular way. There is a refugee center that was built in conjunction with the town and local townspeople that is largely volunteer supported, largely volunteer financed, which affords refugees hot showers, a warm, loving, welcoming, well, congratulations for arriving here in the United States and managing to traverse some of the most inhospitable places on the planet, food, clothing, a phone call or a method of communicating with family members here in the United States. Imagine that. And they processed, at this point, I would imagine, somewhere close to or in excess of 10,000 refugees. This is not somebody in a church kitchen putting up a couple of people in cots out back. So, great interview. I'm profoundly uncomfortable with gauging myself as an interviewer. I'll let other people do that. The work stands for what it is. Got a number of very warm responses from people, so I said, okay, let's share this. So we actually went to Facebook and put up the do-re-mi, if you will. We're willing to spend money on the Facebook to share this. I got turned down because I was sourcing from, as they described it, a place where hate was espoused. I'm a libertarian. I'm as open borders as you get. As far as I'm concerned, folks should be allowed to come into this country if they're willing to work, get a work permit with a path to citizenship, and live happily ever after, pay taxes, get car insurance, get screwed over by the government just like us, the rest of us, and live happily ever after of lives fulfilled. And if they want to leave, that's fine too, because who decided that because you were born on one side of the rock, that somehow you're entitled to a life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and just because you were born on the wrong side of the damn rock, sucks to be you. So I'm ready for Facebook to embrace this. Libertarians, people who don't know they're libertarians, a community putting out love for people who have suffered through some of the worst conditions in America. I was turned down flat. No mas, no go forward, do not pass go, do not collect $200, do not share this message of positivity with the country. That's nuts.
It's a terrible shame, and especially when it's a cause that makes a difference to real human people's lives. I mean, when one of the things that I found with Facebook, because I work in Facebook advertising, spending money on there, is a lot of times one of the best things that we can do, and what tends to get the best results, is telling human stories, right? So feature real people talking about things that they've actually done, and it's bizarre that they would even want to step away from that. And again, that's exactly why these other companies have cropped up, and why they've become successful fairly quickly, backed by some pretty big names. Again, primarily on the conservative side of things, but I would anticipate in the future, as it's a pendulum, right? Always swinging back for where these things are, that we would see pretty strong left-leaning groups as well form on social media if Facebook isn't going to continue to cater to them in the long term, for whatever reason that might be.
So now you've got Gavin. I want to get back to that too in a second. Are you familiar with MeWe?
I've never used MeWe. It is a platform that has been sent to me. But as speaking frankly, I recently decided, out of frustration of Facebook and with other content sites, which shall remain nameless, I decided to host all of my own content on my own website. Right. So as of right now, MeWe is now going on my list, and I will have an account by the end of the night. Because, again, trying to find the right platforms that are going to accept these kind of dialogues is important in 2019.
Well, MeWe is a bleep show of the highest or lowest form. When I tell you, and some of my friends will be, the minute I say this, will be over there in a heartbeat, it is Trumper heaven. There is a MeWe group called People Who Got Banned Permanently from Facebook. Okay, that is a MeWe group. The breadth of Trump love and the breadth is just astonishing. And some of what passes for dialogue is just, dude, not easily shocked.
So maybe you're saying I shouldn't check it out because it might be a bit much.
No, for sure, for sheer entertainment value.
True.
I mean, it's a lot of fun because you won't get banned really for anything, and you could just go into a chat room and say, ask a simple question like, do you call Donald Trump daddy or poppy? And and then just, you actually watch your computer start to melt. It's actually great fun as a libertarian. I highly recommend it for if you're up for truly. Now they describe Twitter as a dumpster fire. Nope, got nothing on MeWe. But again, you've got this critical mass that you have to overcome in any of this. So if, let's just say hypothetically you're involved in politics, asking for a friend, right? Where do you spend right now? Let's say you're running a grassroots campaign. Maybe you have a few $1,000s to spend. You're out there, you're looking, say hypothetically you're running a race in Western Pennsylvania, or Eastern Pennsylvania for that matter, where you've got a smaller media market. So you can confine your purchase, perhaps cable TV or television or local news. Well, local newspapers are just always been nutty expensive. But let's just say you've got a wide variety of places to spend your advertising dollar. As we approach 2020, the question so many campaigns are going to be facing is, where do we spend this money? What do we do? Where do you go? Where does at this moment in time, and God knows 6 months from now, 3 months from now, it's a different world, right? There's an app that might be about to be downloaded tomorrow that we don't know about. But what would you recommend to grassroots campaigns, whether they be libertarian or liberal?
Yeah, well, I think there's going to be, I guess, two parts to that. And the first thing that we need to recognize is that as things become more decentralized, on Facebook we started to see it, and now with these new platforms we started to see it, they are reinforcing echo chambers, right? So on a platform like MeWe, perhaps, or we've seen this on Parler, Parler, which is a primarily conservative Twitter-esque space, there are very few differing ideas, right? So I think that really means two things. One is a campaign could choose to jump into these wholeheartedly and spend all of their money in that group to make sure that they lock down that group. But I think the more interesting question is actually, all they need to do is get awareness in that group, right? So like, let's say Donald Trump, for example, in 2020, running, he doesn't need to put any money into Parler because he knows that every single user there is already going to vote for him. And it could actually make campaigns more efficient because they can spend their money in those in between areas like Facebook, like Twitter, where there's still, because they were first to market, there's still a very diverse budding community where there are still undecided voters to be won over. So again, it's not going to be pretty, I don't think, because of the nature of these platforms. Where the money is going to be spent is only going to continue to do it. But in the long term, past 2020, recognizing that these silos exist, these echo chambers exist, I think it's going to become essential to understanding politics and how elections are run in the future.
Well, now you bring up an interesting point, because what's one of the biggest mistakes I've seen conservative and even some libertarian campaigns make is that they advertise in their echo chamber. We've got a local talk radio station. Incredibly enough, in the Providence market, they've got local talk radio running from 6-ish in the morning until 9 at night, uninterrupted. One sports show, 3, 4 hardcore call-in, guest-driven, but ultimately call-in driven talk radio shows talking about politics. So, you've got this great environment, and what's the first thing I hear candidates doing? They Republican or the Independents, they advertise on WPRO. Now, I'm not knocking the people at WPRO; they're a fine group of people. But why in the hell do you waste money advertising to people who are going to vote for you anyway? Talk to that. How important is it for campaigns, whether it be, God forbid, personally, let's actually show up, to walk right into the belly of the beast and show up at places where, quite frankly, they might hate you?
Right.
That seems to be the missing ingredient. But what's been your experience?
Well, so I think if you're gonna spend money, if you are in a position where you can spend money, sure, why not throw it at every single place that you can if you have enough to spend in the places where you really need it. But for a lot of campaigns, especially local campaigns, state level campaigns where you're working with budgets under $50,000, you have to make some tough choices. And in my mind, what you'd want to do is focus on that middle ground, the undecided voter, and make a compelling, moderate case that makes you look more sane than the other person. But there is still a home for those echo chambers, and that's at your get out the vote time, right? So the days leading up to the election, on election day, absolutely, you got to be hitting those hard, because otherwise you'll be amazingly loved and also unemployed, because you will not have been elected if those folks don't show up to the polls for you. So there is a home for that, but I agree completely. The ad spend is not intelligent at this point. People use a shotgun approach, and I love data, right? I'm a huge fan of some of the things that these companies are doing where, when you're knocking on doors, you can know, okay, this person cares about really against wars overseas. Right? Okay, awesome. Hi, I already know you're a likely voter. I already know what you care about before I walk up to the door. That approach, however, has not made its way into other aspects of campaigning yet. And as our data continues to get better, for worse, as we all give up our data to these companies, I'm hoping that we'll see smarter, more efficient campaigns being run, especially by libertarian candidates, where the budgets are very often under $50,000. And they need to make those small amounts go further.
Right. In fact, very often it can be in a handful of $1,000s or less. I know one of the challenges as a party that we kind of, I'll call it a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the past cycle, was this notion that we should have 1,000 candidates out there. And quite frankly, I think the walk away from that, and I'm not criticizing the people who championed it, we did it. We did it as a group. We now need to study the results, but my thought is that we stretch candidacy so thin that very often the supporting staff of people who would typically be a supporting staff person and do a hell of a job of it find themselves in the uncomfortable position of being a candidate, underfunded and lacking the supporting staff because, well, they were the supporting staff. We stretched ourselves so thin that we were in races that I think sometimes we embarrass ourselves. And that's not to take a shot at the people who ran. I mean, these people, anyone who runs for public office should be, particularly as a libertarian, is our hero. But we should also not encourage them to go into situations where, quite frankly, they don't have a shot at succeeding. Even by, in my notion, succeeding is articulating a clear libertarian message to a group of people who might not have heard us otherwise. That to me is succeeding in many cases. But my personal opinion is we stretched ourselves out too thin 2 years ago. We exhausted the donor base, and as a result, we've got to go into 2020. We got to be smart. So, is digital really the only way to go right now?
Well, I'd like to comment on something, if it's all right with you, before I move on to that question, because yes, we did exhaust that donor base to a very large sum of money. I mean, if you look at the Gary Johnson campaign, for example, it was what, $12.5 million invested in that campaign. And it did amazing things for the brand in a lot of ways, and it hurt the brand in other ways. I'm a big Gary Johnson guy, if you remember. I believe we talked about that last time I was here. But so I don't want to trash on it, but at the same time, with an average cost of $55,000 per state house race across the country, that's over 200 people who could have been running races with $50,000 in their pocket. And maybe there could have been folks who got elected to the state house as a result. So that is the debate. And I'm working on an article now where I've had the opportunity to speak to libertarians across the country about their opinions on that exact question. And really what I'm walking away with as an answer, and as you'll see in the article in a few weeks, it's a point of contention. There isn't a consensus around that about whether or not it should be just larger candidates or exclusively small candidates or some mix of the middle. So I wanted to throw that out there because you're absolutely right. But that point of contention is there, and it's very prevalent. So I'll be curious to see how that shakes out. But to answer your question directly about digital, yes, 100% digital is the way of the future. That is my opinion, certainly, but I think I base that on data, and data is also the reason why I believe it. The ability to target the voters that you want to speak to and not waste money on speaking to those who can't be convinced, that's the way of the future. And in the long term, we'll be able to get it down to the individual level and make individualized appeals to voters on the issues that they care about. Whether that'll be healthy or not for democracy is another conversation, but it will give us the technology to get there.
But you raise a critical point because it's got to be data-driven digital advertising. The days are simply, all right, I'm going to, let's say in the case of Rhode Island, I'm going to pay to share this white paper or / opinion page to everybody between the ages of 18 and 35 in Rhode Island. Those days have to be dead. It's become too expensive to waste money like that. But what are some of the techniques as someone who works in this professionally? I know that Facebook has got some data-driven collection techniques. What can campaigns begin to tackle? First off, in terms of easily accessible software to glean data, and B, how important is it? And this to me is the killer question. How important is it at the local affiliate level to develop a stable source of in-house expertise on digital marketing?
I think it's essential. What I would say is, in terms of accessing this information, it feels daunting, but there are a number of firms that will do that for you. Whether that's i360 has been known to be very helpful. Voter Gravity, WAPI, who ran with Ted Cruz and really was cutting edge on the conservative side, at least on the data push. There are firms out there who you can partner with, and there is, of course, a question of whether or not that's worth the money or not. I cannot imagine a situation in which it's not worth the money, simply because the savings that you'll get from not wasting your time knocking on 1,000 doors, right? There's only so many hours in the day. And if you're going to knock on 1,000 doors, wouldn't it be great if every single one of those thousands were people who you could actually convince to vote for you, instead of folks who are going to slam the door in your face and yell at you? It's a no-brainer in my mind.
Right. The LP is engaging in some aggressive investments in CRM right now. What are your thoughts on that, and as opposed to using third-party environments, just in general? And any thoughts on that issue?
I do actually have thoughts on that issue. Yeah, ownership of data is important. I love the idea of using a third party. In the short term, it's convenient, but in the long term, if the LP can keep the data consistent and up to date, it'll be worth every single penny. Pennsylvania is my home state, is one of the states where we have jumped into that CRM system. The state director here, the chair, Steve Sheets, is a big believer in that system, and I was very happy to see them go in that direction. But now there's 33 states that are involved in this, and once the other they can round out the 50, that data will be huge in achieving economies of scale to do it more efficiently. It'll be a game changer.
But you bring up a critical point. I'll use the word consistent. It is not simply good enough to take a snapshot in time. The efforts have to be ongoing, and that requires a revenue stream dedicated to support that ongoing data collection techniques. Is LP Pennsylvania aggressively pursuing that type of consistency, and how hard in reality is that to do in terms of skill sets?
At the end of the day, we think about big data as this abstract idea, but if you break it down to each of its individual points, it's people inputting data points at some point in that process, right? So yeah, it's definitely an undertaking. I know that Pennsylvania is optimistic. I've not been part of those conversations in terms of how they're approaching that personally, but as the outsider looking in and seeing the public relations things coming out of that group, I'm excited about it because I think that as I have interacted with candidates across the state for the last 10 years now, they need it. They absolutely need that support. And the biggest frustration that we hear from candidates is, I'm not getting the support I need from the state or the national level. If we can get it at the state level, all the better.
Excellent, excellent. Final word, I guess. There's a variety of terminology for it. I'll just use the generic one, bleep posting, and I think you know what I mean. It's very tempting in the middle of a campaign to sit there and engage in, endless volleys of insults, shit posting. Did I say that? Yes. And trying to. I'll never forget the I'm online. There's a very nice individual in Rhode Island, great guy, and he's trying to explain to me online how he's working with a couple of Bernie-crats to convince them to join the Libertarian Party. And deep down, I'm saying to myself, that's probably never going to happen, ever. And so many of those conversations, not by him, I've seen degenerate into insults hurled and just stupidity. How damaging is that? Is A, a waste of time, and B, to the overall brand, if that's what our idea of digital convergence is?
Yeah, let's think about it in terms of the way business handles communications, right? Marketing firms exist. Many companies have their own in-house communications people, marketing people. To say that thinking public relations through is necessary is an understatement. It's incredibly important because your brand is who you are in the public mind, and people are out there making the decision, is this a group of people or is this a person who I like, who I want to follow, who I want to be associated with? And yeah, when you're out there posting crazy things, you're going to be treated as a crazy person. And if you are I guess what I'd call a pragmatic libertarian, or even just anybody who cares about liberty generally, regardless of party, that's a really important place to be in right now. And I know we're going to talk about guns in just the next couple minutes, and that's a big part of it, right? Because of the public relations aspect there, anybody who cares about liberty needs to be doing what they can to put forward ideas and do it in a way that is convincing, because there's a whole other side out there that is not liberty friendly, and you can bet your butt that they are putting out ideas and they're doing everything that they can to become credible, to become reliable, and right now it's working. So right. we have some work to do when it comes to the public relations and marketing side of things.
Right, but it's critically important that it be not emotional, that it be policy, factual, and statistically driven. The advantage libertarians have had over the last few years, when we don't fall apart some nights and just, let loose this, seemingly endless trail of invective, is that our philosophy is really, to a large degree, separate from human emotions. It's based on a really almost clinical analysis of the relationship between the individual and government. It's a clinical analysis also of the outcomings, of the relationship between the individual and the government. When we end up diving into that steamy mess of emotions that Republicans and Democrats are just so famous for, call it what you want, we lose ourselves. And in the gun issue, I'll tell you a quick story. Years ago, when you had the massacre at Newtown, the atrocity at Newtown, in the week before that, the Republican Party, at which point that time I wouldn't say I was involved with them, but I was a fan of this individual candidate, put up in a highly Democratic state, one of the bluest states in America, a candidate for Attorney General. It was just stunning. I mean, great guy, had been a state senator for years, helped usher in marriage equality in Rhode Island, okay? Clean as a whistle, an attorney, just overall a great candidate. He articulated and put together a very well-run, detailed campaign launch. Launches the campaign, and a day or two later, Newtown happens. Now, I'm being fast and loose with the dates. At the same time, the Republicans, in the week or so, two before that, announced a gun raffle. Newtown happens. Now, regardless of how we personally feel about liberty, we are in the business of optics. When there is a mass shooting, particularly at that point in time, because that in particular, since it involved small children, was so shocking and so terrible that one would argue that it was a good time to just quietly shut it down for a little while. Just to put it aside so that it wasn't rhetoric we were having. We were giving time for people to grieve, time for people to react, and then having an intelligent, mature conversation. Yep, they doubled down. At which point, said senators, mildly chastised the Republican Party. Well, the Republican Party blew up. We made the New York Times. Congratulations. We showed them. The Republicans were essentially attacking their own candidate for not being liberty enough. It was to say that it was a shit show of the highest order, and it just torpedoed the whole campaign, ruined the launch, and the regular, which had been conducted completely separate from an amateurish, state party, and just the candidacy never really recovered from that. Instead of being able to take the high road and point to accomplishments like marriage equality, honesty, great legal record, all of that, instead it became a discussion about the intelligence of having a gun raffle 2 weeks after the Newtown tragedy. And that's the stuff we have to avoid.
To bring that full circle, I understand your point completely about needing to have the rationale and step away from the emotional outburst on the campaign and just in general. But I also don't want to discount the importance of emotion because we're human, right? And there's something that libertarians and conservatives have done fairly poorly for a very long time, which is tell stories. And humans, over the course of the last several thousand years, that's how we've communicated. That's how we are programmed to remember things most efficiently. And one of the great things, I'm a big fan of Matt Kibbe and the way that he explains the ideas of liberty, because he always does it through a story. And he talks, it's something that the left has done very successfully for a long time, where they say, hey, we have little Susie, and as a result of her getting access to this social program, she's able to raise her family and her kids are going to be better off. And it connects with us in a way that regardless of how we feel up here, we are emotional creatures. And one of the reasons that marketing and communications and thinking ahead before we post something or we write something is so important, because it is what the left is doing, but they're thinking it out ahead of time. And the message that they deliver ends up being polished and clean. Whereas a lot of times the message that comes out has not been run through those filters of, do we have the data to back it up? Are we telling the right story? Is this the right story to tell right now? And the end result could be, hey, not only are our ideas better, because we know that they are, liberty is a winning idea, but also then it's backed up in a way that people not only remember, but it also connects with them in their heart. And I think in the long term, that's really what we're going to have to do, is convince people that liberty is a viable path because it matters to them here and because it matters to them here.
That's an outstanding point. I want to continue the conversation on that in the coming weeks, and I look forward to that upcoming article because, well, it's an outstanding point. And clearly, as we address 2020, where it's clear to me that we're going to have, I believe, a homegrown candidate from the Libertarian Party, it is more important to be efficient as ever. We need to, as the cliche goes, hit on all cylinders, because we won't have the automatic press appeal of a national candidate. That is not at all to diminish the local candidates' efforts, because I think at this point in our history, we need to start promoting from within. It's just that we need, in order to avoid that precipitous drop in voting, and for that to be used in messaging against us, as somehow our efforts or our philosophy is diminished, we need to make sure that we maximize every single effort that we've got, and we need to perform that level of analysis on it. So that's an outstanding point. Let's get into the main part of the show, because we've got about 25 minutes. I want to discuss it at length. Folks, if you're just joining us, Connor Drigotas is online with me. We started a little bit early tonight because we had someone who is in Israel, and let's just say interweb communications aren't quite, well, internationally there. So, we are the Coalition. As always, we're loud and proud, and we're outrage porn free. We're always civilly disobedient media. We broadcast here out of Providence, Rhode Island. And you'll hear this now or in the coming days on our podcast and our YouTube and our Facebook stream. We'd like you to know that we can be found at facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. We're on Twitter at Coalition_radio, and links to our YouTube page and now our relatively new podcast page. We broadcast at a Spreaker, Spotify, and iHeart, is also at coalitionradio.us on the main message. We came together a few weeks ago for the first time, so it's official, Connor. You are now officially a repeat offender. So welcome to that status. Don't know if that's good or not, but Connor Drigotas has got his own website. And in the earlier portion of tonight's conversation with Connor, we discussed sort of the motivation for that, a way to essentially control your message and to make sure that it's given the opportunity to have life and to breathe out there and to reach out to people, as opposed to this sort of the siloing that's taking place on conventional social media. So you've got a pretty provocative article. And by the way, that picture, God bless Facebook, that grabbed a lot of attention. there was no doubt that where you are coming from on this. You grab people right by the throat. But now more than ever, since it appears that the Republican Party, the self-appointed, self-proclaimed Party of Liberty, is starting to crumble, if you will, in their support of the Second Amendment, or in my case, what I take more seriously, the innate, natural-born right of someone to engage in self-defense, which I believe, for lack of a better word, trumps a piece of paper. They're caving, to be blunt. So Connor at ConnorDrigotas.com, that's ConnerDrigotas, has written, I believe, a pretty interesting piece in how we respond to gun control efforts and the abridgment of the Second Amendment. So the article is pretty provocative. Gun control is dead, and so is the debate. What are your thoughts behind this? How did you arrive at this?
Honestly, I think the first thing that's really important to acknowledge is this has been an incredibly difficult week to have this conversation. This is an article that obviously people were interested in because of what happened, but it's also simultaneously the worst time to talk about it because we're seeing an incredible amount of gun violence, which is uncomfortable and it's terrible. And I want to acknowledge we all want to see the end of gun violence, but there is, however, a huge difference in opinion of how to accomplish that goal. First, gun control measures being proposed by Democrats and now Republicans will not work. And that's the point of the article, and that we'll get into some of the details of. But second, when we talk about gun control and talking about this topic, there's one side of the debate that's coming up with ideas, and they're putting stuff forward, even if those ideas are bad and they will not work. But the opposition who is pro-liberty needs to be more active in coming forward with proposals of how to deal with this crisis, simply because, again, we all want gun violence to end. Now the devil's in the details of how to make that happen. So the article itself had 5 different points, and we can approach those if you'd like, or talk about the topic generally, whatever you'd prefer.
Well, let's first start out with, I think my talking point has always been that public tragedy should never, ever impact public policy. And if that sounds harsh and if that sounds cold, I'll apologize that you feel that way. But ultimately, we are a nation whose history is littered with very public tragedies. I argue that the public tragedies, because of the digital age we live in, are that much more upfront and in person. That, of course, does not diminish the gravity of these public tragedies, but it certainly gives the appearance that the problems, or perhaps the solutions, are more invasive and the problems are more pervasive than they seem to be. I know, one prominent individual was taken to task because he showed how many people died. My God. But also pointed out how many people died of suicide, how many veterans died that day. He ran through a whole series of statistics which showed that we've got all sorts of issues and problems. And I think he.
And ironically, that was Neil deGrasse Tyson, I believe, who is traditionally very left-leaning, and he was taken to task online for making those points.
Right, and because if you're a student of history, one only look at the Cultural Revolution that happened in China and understand that very often the left feed upon themselves incessantly if, in fact, that one moment, and it may be just a moment, that you diverge from the theocracy, if you will. So I just have to say that because I think that's we still need to step aside as a society and try and, for lack of a better term, curate our approaches based on a far longer term picture than whatever horror, and it was horror, was perpetrated upon a populace at any one time. So let's go specifics. I'm big on specifics, and you list 5. So let's start at the very top. First of all,
I want to identify what we're talking about first, and that's red flag laws, gun confiscation, mandatory buybacks. These are the kind of things that these 5 points essentially invalidate. Those are bad ideas, and these 5 ideas that I listed hopefully convince you that these will not work moving forward.
Right. So let's break them out step by step. Gun buybacks are the perfect example of good intentions, because we're going to ascribe to the opposition, for the purpose of tonight's conversation, that these in fact are good intentions, that the people doing them intend to have a society that is freer of violence. So why, for example, gun buybacks, what could possibly go wrong? Why don't they work?
Well, for so many reasons. I think one of the more famous examples is the guy who went out and bought a bunch of PVC pipe, installed a trigger-looking item on the bottom of it, spray painted it, and then traded them in for $200 a piece, and then went out and bought himself a much nicer rifle as a result. There's a huge lack of education. And when you're looking at that, the first point that I made in the article is there are just so many guns in America. Doing a buyback program, if you think that's going to solve the problem, there are simply too many firearms for any of these proposals to be viable in America. It's almost 400 million guns and an estimated 12 trillion rounds of ammo, according to several studies that I found. So, those are just astronomical numbers. And to assume that any of these proposals would even come close to cracking that, it's just not going to happen.
Well, there are members of the progressive community in the left who will say at the same time that you have no chance against the government, that the government, that you have this purported reason you have the ability to overthrow a tyrannical government simply doesn't exist in the first world, while simultaneously saying you have no chance against the government because of the weaponry you have. While, by the way, simultaneously, it's been pointed out by people far smarter than I this week, they are at the same time screaming about concentration camps along the border. So, which is it? Do we have a tyrannical government or not? On one hand, they're arguing we have. Number two, we shouldn't have the weaponry to overthrow, a tyrannical government. Yet at the same time, they would prevent us from having it. Yet at the same time, they don't want anyone to have guns whatsoever.
Well, I think it's right. Well, those are the debate topics that are going on in the news every day. But what I want people to hopefully take away from this is there's a lot of noise, but not a lot of it is actually substantive, right? Because regardless of whether or not we have what we need today, or we could have what we need, or if there is in fact a need because the government's tyrannical, all of those different debates are irrelevant in a reality in which guns cannot be controlled, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say we do or do not have a tyrannical government. That doesn't actually have any impact on whether or not we need guns, because every single person, and this is the second point in the article, has the ability to create guns at home. Cody Wilson and Defense Distributed made sure of that back in 2013 with the release of the Liberator and their plans in the last years. Despite their legal troubles, any one of these plans could be found to create your own firearm at home right now. And that also includes people create their own bullets at home all the time. And now they just do it for fun. Imagine if they actually needed to do it, what that world would look like. So to say, oh, the government is this or isn't this, it is a very interesting conversation, but it's so theoretical because we're living in a world that is past that. Guns exist, we can all have them, and you can't take them away.
Right. What about the notion that somehow the armaments that the average gun owner has simply couldn't possibly take on America's military? Have they read any history about the Vietnam War? Have they read any history of any one of a number of insurrections taking place in the First and Second Worlds around this planet? What's going on there?
I mean, I think resistance is a very reasonable point to consider. I acknowledge that there are arguments that, the increased militarization of police, the increased capabilities of the government, but there's really two parts to that. One is that these are very real human beings who are police officers and who are soldiers in the United States Army. And yes, there are historical examples where the majority of a population has been oppressed by people in those positions. But I would like to think, and perhaps I'm overly optimistic, that the American ethos is such that there is a little bit of a higher calling beyond a figurehead demanding that we become an authoritarian government, right? At the end of the day, there are going to be police officers and there are going to be members of the military who are given an unconstitutional directive, and they're going to say, are you kidding me? I'm not doing that. And that's, that is inherently American. So in terms of a resistance, not only would there be massive numbers of Americans who would stand up against a government that attempted to take that move, but in many cases, they'd probably be led by the people who were, until very shortly before, assigned the task of taking those guns. It's the setup that it would do would be absolutely horrendous in terms of loss of life, but it is part of the calculation, I think, and another reason why it's simply not possible to disarm the population of the United States at this point. And that's, again, the debate that's happening now is, especially on the left with these proposals, is how do we disarm the population? How do we disarm segments of the population? For example, the red flag laws. How do we ban certain types of weapons from being in the hands of private citizens? Those conversations are not interesting to me because it's not possible in any way.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate here because, quite frankly, the red flag argument scares the crap out of me. I grew up in an era, and probably as overstated as the Red Menace was, where the post-breakup of the Soviet Union, post-Brezhnev days, led to an influx of first-generation Americans who had lived through Ceausescu, who had lived through Brezhnev, had lived through a variety of societies where the vaguest psychological terms were often used as a method to silence people at one level or another early on in post-World War II, confiscate weaponry, and this type of extra-legal, not accountable, absence of absence of the proper stages of justice, was actively used in, again, first world countries. And so, particularly since when you get into the woods in a conversation, let's say a hearing, not so much at the talking, screaming heads level on TV or radio, not so much in Facebook chat rooms, but when I've heard a testimony very often used that the high suicide rate amongst American veterans is used anecdotally against veterans and as a justification, and to conflate that as a justification, I should say, to engage in red flag laws. I've had elected officials tell me to my face that they want red flag laws to save our veterans.
Right.
That scares the crap out of me.
And red flag laws have, in the last weeks, become very popular with Republicans. Trump has said that. He rolled it back, of course, very quickly, but, he was in favor of red flag laws for a very quick minute. Crenshaw, even Rhode Island governor, actually, Raimondo, correct? She came out and ripped on your legislature for not taking those steps. But I still think that within those 5 points, so let's say that as an individual, someone does have a red flag EPRO act taken against them and they are left temporarily disarmed. Mm-hmm. In modern America, with the advent of ghost gunning, the ability to create your own guns at home, human exchange, right? There's always going to be someone out there with a stockpile willing to sell to the right person. I don't think it's possible to truly disarm someone. And I think that's really the point that I'm trying to make, is that even if someone does get hit with a act like this, there's always another avenue for them to exercise their fundamental right to self-defense. I do want to acknowledge what you said, though, has a lot of power, that the history of this has shown a lot of examples where these sorts of things have worked. And I alluded to that just a little bit into the article, but I'd be very curious to hear more kind of what it was like to live through that, right? I was born in 1990. I didn't have the benefit of living through those kind of experiences, but I do think the long-term risk to the Second Amendment and to the fundamental right to self-defense is in changing the way we think. Every year there are fewer people that hunt because parents are not passing that down to their kids. Every year there are more kids who are hearing the narrative about gun ownership being wrong. And whether it takes one generation or 10 generations, that could be beaten out of the American population. So this is, and I do acknowledge that as a shortfall of my argument, is it's only a snapshot in time. And I think there's a Ronald Reagan quote out there that, it only takes one generation for us to lose everything we have. And all we have to do is hopefully continue to be vigilant to ensure that doesn't happen.
Well, and one need... Sadly, Venezuela has become the poster child for about every neocon/conservative and even some libertarian arguments. The de-arming, if you will, of the Venezuelan society clearly has had an impact in these terrible times to their ability to fight. We saw Venezuelans being shot in the streets by their, and this is we've had two situations, one very highly publicized and one not so. And obviously, we all saw Venezuelans shot in the streets by their own military. We saw violent means employed against Spaniards looking to discuss and vote on a peaceful secession from the Spanish government. Now, Spain is a first world nation. It's considered a democracy with a vestige of a monarchy. What happened in those riots? So again, playing devil's advocate, your point's well taken. One would love to believe, but again, it's all about information. What's happening generationally, as you point out, particularly in vast parts of the country now, particularly in the coastal areas, that American children have no contact with guns other than as some sort of arcane, amorphous concept, as opposed to a hands-on experience. They have nothing to judge them by other than what they are being spoon-fed. I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm not. But I just see society seeing the conventional wisdom is two or threefold when it comes to civil liberties. The great cliches of all time. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to worry about. Guns are for other people. That's the, the Bible-thumping hunter types from the great flyover country. When I look at Pennsylvania, I've hundreds of times probably, I've driven through an area called the Wild. And in along central and southern Pennsylvania, there's this great vast stretch in between the outer districts of Harrisburg, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, where hunting culture is still very, very strong. They're beautiful parts of the country, wonderful people, outstanding places to live. But that's becoming the extreme now. That's almost, kind of a cute look back in time. Whereas so many kids now, just because also of the absence of any education whatsoever in civil liberties, really don't understand that the American Revolution was not a peaceful group of people coming together in a chat room deciding to, say, "Aw, shucks, all right, we'll still be friends, we'll have that special relationship." The United States of America exists because of a series of increasingly violent actions started by the burning of the Gaspee right here in Warwick, Rhode Island, where the revolution really began, by the way, not some joint up in Boston or something, some sort of nonsense, Lexington or whatever. That's where it really began. And people died. And people died for the cause. There's a great series done on what happened to all the signers of the Declaration of Independence, in their lives after that. Many of them died bankruptcy. Many of them died in jail. Many of them gave up entire lives of comfort. Those were the gentry at the time who decided to walk away from that, and the reaction to that in their lives was violent. It was not a peaceful separation. It was a bloody, bloody divorce. So it scares me. But then again, popular culture will then paint me as someone who's an extremist.
And I know we're running up on 8:30 here too, but I do want to make sure I get in a note of optimism,
okay,
which I think is important, and that is that there are some really great voices out there doing some really great things. One of the places that this article ran was on 71 Republic, which is a libertarian-leaning news organization that's primarily made up of young authors. When I say young, I'm 28 years old. A lot of these people are in their late teens, early 20s, and they are so far further ahead than I would have even imagined when I was, 10 years younger. And organizations like that, of these people who are coming together. It's a decentralized world, right? We were talking about this earlier, where these different news outlets and social media platforms allow people to come together in great ways. That's a great group of people who's doing really fantastic work. Governor Sununu up in New Hampshire just vetoed 3 bills today that came out of the legislature that would have instituted many of these bad ideas that we've been talking about all night. And even voices like Ann Coulter, not someone who I normally praise on in any venue. We disagree on a lot of things, but she was taking Donald Trump to task today for even considering those kinds of measures. So it is exciting to at least see some people taking a stand, doing the things that they need to do to move the ball forward and protect our liberties at the end of the day.
And you're absolutely right. First of all, on a couple of accounts, that's where I read your work for the first time, was on 71 Republic. Great stuff, and you're right. It's heartening to see young folks, because I'm now in, guys like me and Tom Arnold are in that. Yeah, all the younger ladies in the Liberty Movement are friendly to us now, because we're the grandfathers now. It's fun, but I wish I was younger. The challenge that I'm going to issue to folks who are either listening now or listen in the future is that I believe one of the more insidious parts of this red flag legislation, and I want to pick up this conversation again in a couple of weeks, because I really enjoy your input and your approach and your reasoning. But one of the ways that we can fight this is the notion that federal funding for a lot of things is going to be based on compliance with some of these proposed red flag laws. And ironically, Rhode Island adopted red flag legislation. For everyone who thinks the ACLU doesn't automatically support folks who are 2A friendly, well, I'll tell you, the Rhode Island ACLU here was one of the strongest opponents of the red flag laws that passed here in Rhode Island last year. And Republicans, by the way, voted for those damn laws. But the laws that we have in place don't are not as strict as some of the laws, incredibly enough, being proposed at the federal level. And when you tie in funding, whether it be highways, drug prevention, so many of the wars on, fill in the blanks, whether it be the wars on drugs, the wars on sex work, the wars on civil liberties, are tied into federal funding. So that slowly boiling lobster, as we say here in New England, takes place because of our willingness to trade our liberties for federal loot, which ironically is our money to begin with, and it was stolen from us using coercion. And that's an area I think we can all agree, and we need to fight, because funding should not be a litmus test. Getting back our own money should not be a litmus test for subscribing to some of these brutal abrogations of our civil liberties. And I think as libertarians, that's a strong, strong hill to stand on, even during times when emotions are running crazy. So where can folks find you on the web? Give us the litany of places.
Yeah, honestly, the easiest place to find me is ConnorDrigotas.com, ConnerDrigotas.com. It's my website, and the great thing about having a name like that is if you search me, I'm the only one out there. So feel free to Google me and find all my social handles otherwise.
Well, there are many articles on the site already, very thoughtful, very accessible, and that to me is the challenge that the liberty movement needs to face. You manage to combine reasoning with accessibility, and in an era dominated by what I call short attention span theater, that's going to be a very valuable tool in all of our fight to maintain and grab back the liberties that we've lost. So as always, I appreciate you taking the time on a Friday night to join us, and again, I thank you and salute your continuing contributions to liberty. All right, my friend?
Happy to be here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We'll talk soon.
All right. God bless, lad. Connor Drigotas, that's ConnerDrigotas.com. He's on Facebook, a couple of places, but go directly to the source. Some great articles. And I also want to tout 71 Republic and as a great example of independence working to promote liberty and libertarian values in a manner that basically subverts the kind of white noise you hear in the media and brings challenging conversations of challenging subjects right to folks and allows them the opportunity to join in and engage in the healthy kind of debate that we need to as a society. Connor, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a very quick break right now. Joining us in just a minute is someone who chairs, I got to believe, well, after Rhode Island, maybe one of the most challenging libertarian affiliates. Imagine being a libertarian in Los Angeles. Holy cow. Folks, stay tuned. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free. We will be right back.